Well, we're coming back from break now, and so we've already got Bonnie Skinner sitting here waiting for us. Morning, afternoon, evening for you, Bonnie. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. My pleasure. Thanks so much for the invite.
I'm super excited to be hearing about what you've got to say, because I've listened to you, and I was saying earlier when we first started that, you know, I've spoken to you one-on-one before and got some support, and, you know, you've done a lot of presentations that I've been at and heard, and like I always get valuable information. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you and hearing from you today. So firstly, I thought perhaps you could just introduce yourself and your business and what you do.
Okay, well, I am Bonnie Skinner, as you mentioned. My most recent passion project is my company, so Level Up Mental Fitness Coaching. So I am a registered psychotherapist by trade. I've been doing that for a little over 12 years now. And more recently, the last couple of years, I've really turned my attention to focus on entrepreneurs and the specific mental health and mental fitness struggles that they have. Being in business presents a different set of factors. And so one of the things that I had identified in my private practice was that business clients who own businesses, business owners, entrepreneurs, didn't stay as long. And so I got really curious a few years ago about why that was happening. You know, what was it that they weren't getting out of the service? Was it just me? Right. And then after kind of conferring with some colleagues, I realized like, no, there's something about traditional therapy that is beneficial, but there's a little bit more that entrepreneurs need. And so I kind of pivoted and started to really focus on that, and thus Level Up.
Well, you've definitely got a niche market there. There's a lot of people that are going to need your help and support, which is good. And so with your business, what sort of services do you offer?
So I do one-on-one coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I also do a lot of public speaking, as you probably already know. And then I do some one-off consultations as well.
Okay. So what made you decide to really focus on just the entrepreneurs and business owners and mentors, as you said? Like I mean, because there's other people that could definitely use your services, but why did you decide that it was better to niche?
It was two things really. One was I really, to be honest with you, like I started this out of a curiosity to really understand what was happening in my own private practice. And from there, when I identified what the need was, the other thing that I had noticed was like, there wasn't anybody speaking. Well, I shouldn't say there wasn't anybody, that's not true. But I didn't necessarily find that the information that was out there for entrepreneurs was what we needed, right? Like, you know, I've always had an interest in business, always wanted, you know, to have my own business and be in my own business. And so like, for me, it wasn't just about, you know, is this another niche that I could serve? It was really about like, well, what would I want to get out of it, right? And so when I went looking for the information, there wasn't a really cohesive, understandable, actionable package of information out there. So I just kind of decided to create one, and that's how kind of Level Up was born. And then we've iterated and reiterated ever since, and kind of it keeps getting better.
And I know that you've got some growth coming up, but we can talk about that a little bit later. One of the things that you offer is doing an assessment on people's mental fitness. So tell us, what is mental fitness and how does that differ from mental health?
So very, very good question. This was one of the first questions that I asked myself, was like, first of all, what's the difference? I thought, to be honest with you, everything was mental health. The best way that I can explain it is this. When we think about health, we think about health kind of in three phases, right? So we think about injury, right? So something in our body is not operating the way that it should. If I'm, you know, good one day and I sprain my ankle, then I have an injury. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm not operating the way that I should. And then there's the absence of injury or disease, right? That's typically what we call mental health. So when things are working, quote unquote, as they should, right? Are my feelings in line with my perceptions, those kinds of things, right? Mm-hmm. Are my responses in line with my values and those kinds of things? But above that, there's another level. So when we think about the highest levels of physical health, we think about things like, you know, athletes, Olympians, for example, right? I might have healed from my sprained ankle or my broken leg, but that doesn't mean you're going to see Bonnie at the next set of Olympics, right? And so we know that there's that extra level that is beyond just the absence of illness or disease. And so that's really the model on which I kind of built the understanding that I present of mental fitness. So you have mental illness, right? There's a struggle. Something's not working the way that it should. We might be anxious. We might be depressed. We might be burnt out. And then there's the absence of that. I can think clearly. I can problem solve, right, fairly well. But those things aren't optimized. When we talk about mental fitness, we're talking about the optimization of our cognitive processes. How do I go from being able to work on a project more efficiently, more effectively, right, for longer? How do I be able to manage things without succumbing to the stress and the pressures, right, which is a really, really big need in when you choose to be an entrepreneur. So that's the biggest difference between the two, is really when we're talking about health, we're just talking about the general way our minds should function. When we're talking about fitness, we're talking about the optimized state of our cognitive and psychological abilities.
And I'd imagine for most of us as entrepreneurs, we want to be working at that optimized state and in that space. But why do we struggle with it so much? And what would you recommend, or is there any sort of strategies that you think we could help us, operate and work more frequently in that optimized level, mental fitness level?
That's a great question. Yeah. The quick answer to that a clinician would usually give is stop doing things that stress you. So this was part of the problem that I identified when I was trying to figure out what was happening with business owners and why they weren't staying connected to services, was that the pace of therapy is usually very exploratory, right? So as a therapist, I don't tell you what to do, right? I don't tell you how to do it. I explore with you and kind of you figure out the things that you want to do. And if there's something that is causing consistent stress on you, one of the biggest recommendations is like, well, what would it be to consider not doing that thing? The problem is as entrepreneurs, we've chosen to live at the very edges of our capability. Right? We've chosen to be outside of our comfort zone all the time. And our nervous system doesn't really like that, right? So we have to be able to optimize our psychology for that, because it's actually, it's a special environment. It's a special way of doing life. And so when we think about what are the hazards of doing that, we know you're more, entrepreneurs have higher levels of burnout, higher levels of anxiety and depression, higher levels of addictions, right, and substance use. And so that's primarily because they're constantly stressed and succumbing to the pressures that they face every single day.
I imagine like high level people in, oh God, I've got no words left. People that are operating in high profile positions in the workplace, and even mothers that are, tired because they're juggling so much and not getting the optimum sleep and things, would be operating in a lower level too, right?
Yeah.
So how do you help those people? What's the process that you're going to put us? What are you putting me through, Bonnie?
So the first thing I try to figure out is like where you are and what are you doing, right? It is the biggest, because even though we have a common set of pressures as entrepreneurs, okay, so we know that there's pace is a pressure. We know that environment is a pressure. We know that our goals is a pressure, and the limitation of our resources. But that doesn't mean that everybody's struggling in the exact same way. So the first thing that I try to figure out is like, what is your specific struggle, right? So for example, I coach moms who are like, how do I apply myself fully to my business and not feel like I'm abandoning my children or not spending enough time with my children, right? And so we might, for example, look at, okay, well, first of all, there's two ways to look at that. One is, what does the practical look like? Right? So like, show me your schedule. Tell me what your typical day looks like. Tell me how you plan things. Tell me how you lay things out. And once we've identified what's going on practically, then we'd say, okay, well, what's going on emotionally, right? What does it mean to abandon your kids, right? Does it mean that you don't get to be there when they get off the bus at the end of the day? Does it mean that you don't, you might spend a whole weekend in the office? Because there's varying different levels. And so sometimes when we use language, we assume that we know what somebody else thinks. So I really spend a lot of time trying to understand how my clients conceptualize their problems. How do they explain it to me? What does it mean to not spend enough time? What does enough time look like? And once we really narrow down, like, okay, what are your exact struggles and what are your specific goals? That's when we start saying, okay, now how do we get there? Right? How do we build you a mental fitness coaching plan to get you to that point?
Well, here's a question. I'm going off script again because I can't help myself.
That's okay.
But often when we are in a position of helping people, whether that's coaching, mentoring, therapists, in the beginning of our careers in that space, we project on our client. How do you get around doing that?
Oh, that's a darn good question.
Sorry, off script.
No, that's perfect. It's, first of all, I think, to be honest, there's a big part of my clinical training helps with that, right? Because it's super easy to relate, right? Like, I've got a 5-year-old daughter and one on the way. And so when somebody is saying, I have struggles as a mom, the first thing I want to do is be like, oh my God, I totally know what you mean, right? But we train very hard as clinicians to make sure we keep ourselves out of the room, right?
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I constantly tell myself is there's 360 degrees of human experience, right? And I might have one. So we can have the same problem, but there's 360 degrees of possibility about how we perceive that problem. And just because I've had a similar problem or a problem present the same way, it doesn't mean that I have your problem, right? And so in doing that, it's really about consciously paying attention to myself and making sure that I'm not over investing, right? Or I'm not over identifying with a struggle. I had a really fantastic conversation with a client today talking about, how do they best support their staff member and how do they have a conversation? And before we even talked about what words to say in the conversation, I talked about the relationship that she had with her employee, because part of what can happen is when we become very close to people and we identify, we go from that professional into a personal relationship. And what we often don't realize is our disposition can change, right? So you might walk into the room wanting to have the conversation as a boss, but all of a sudden the friend shows up and now you're maybe, pulling punches a little bit. You're not saying the things that they really need to hear. And so it takes a bit of work, but one of the things that I really usually start with and encourage folks to pay attention to is mental awareness. Like, you've got to know what your state is. So what state is your mind in? What state is your body in? And how do each of those states affect the way that you communicate, the way that you behave, and the way that you think?
There's a lot of people, a lot of our followers that struggle from a leadership perspective. And so when they are having conversations with staff, they want to be a leader and I guess tell them what they need, but they end up being the yes person and letting the staff member kind of dictate what's going on. So what sort of advice or strategies can you recommend for, I guess, people that are trying to be better leaders rather than being a yes woman?
It's important to know what you need out of the people you're leading. When I ask most entrepreneurs, like, what draws you to leadership? Why do you want to be a leader? I always get, like, the first response, 85+% of the time, is like, oh, I want to help people, right? I want to help people. I want to change the world. I want to contribute to my community. I want to give back. And they're beautiful answers and they're not wrong, right? The struggle is it's not the whole story, right? So, any of my clients will tell you, it's like, Bonnie won't stop there. Like, I'll be like, yeah, okay, then what? Like, so then you help people, then what? What's in it for you, right? And that's a very hard question to answer, because most of us got these big, beautiful hearts, and we don't want to think that we can build a business around our personal needs. But the problem is if we build a business that neglects our personal needs, we will then start to get what we need from our clients, whether it's good from our clients or not, good for our clients or not. Okay. So the biggest recommendation I usually say is, like, know what you want to get out of it. Know why it's important to you. If you are struggling from, projecting onto your clients, or changing the way that you interact with your clients based on your mood or whatever the case may be, then something's going on in that relationship that isn't about whatever service you provide, right? And it's very human. We get into it. It's part of what I teach all my clients. But again, going back to the awareness piece, that is paramount, because you can't you'll never perform in a relationship better than the relationship you have with yourself. Right. So, like, if there's something lacking in the relationship you have with yourself, or just in your own perception of the world, eventually it'll show up in your professional relationships.
Yep. Whoever, I know there's a saying somewhere, there's a saying along the lines of what you've just said, and whoever did that was a wise person. Because it's resaid all the time, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So another, like something that we've been, a flavor or a theme that we're kind of tracking on today is talking about, there's a lot of women out there that are lacking confidence to, you know, forge new paths, take a leap, try something different, go for a new job. How do you help your clients overcome this low confidence? And do you have any strategies that we could try?
This is going to seem a little counterintuitive, but I tell them they don't need to be confident. And here's what I mean when I say that. We tend to think that confidence is something we should feel across the board, right? Like go out and be bold and be confident in all you do. And it's like, that's not only silly, it's completely unnecessary. You don't need to be confident to be great. You don't need to be confident to build incredible things. You need to be confident at the stuff you're good at, right? So the example that I usually give folks is like, Bonnie is not a confident ballerina. I'm just not. You can put ballet shoes on me, but you got nothing but disappointment coming from me. That's what you can look forward to. And but the thing is when we have this idea that we should be confident across the board, then it's like, okay, well, Bonnie should be a confident ballerina, but I don't do ballet. I don't practice. I don't know it. I didn't learn it. Why would I feel like I can be confident at something I'm not competent in?
Mm-hmm.
So what I usually say to folks is, don't focus on whether or not you're confident. Focus on whether or not you're congruent. And here's what I mean by that is you take confidence on one hand and you take competence on the other. If you are good at something, that's when you want to have high confidence. Right? If you are bad at something, your confidence should not be high. So if we think of confidence as the feeling of how good you are or something, right? Competence is the objective measurement of it. So if you're measurably not good at something, I don't want you to walk into my office and be like, yeah, Bonnie, I can get that done for you, no problem. Right? Because that causes a problem. You can also get the inverse of that, where somebody's actually very, very confident. And this happens a lot to women, right? Because we're very confident in something, but something happens. Sorry, we're very competent in something, but something happens to pull our confidence down. That's a situation that needs to be addressed. If you're good at something and demonstratably other people are saying it, they can demonstrate it, they can point it out, they can prove it to you, but you don't feel it. That's something that needs to be addressed, right? And I address those things with my clients. But what I usually say to folks is like, well, ask yourself, is this something you need to be confident in? Right? And are you competent? The second question is, so first one, do you need to be confident in it? I don't need to be a confident ballerina. Nobody's disappointed. Bonnie's not doing ballet. Okay. Are you competent in it? Right? So is there a mismatch between how capable you are at performing the task and how you think you perform the task? Because that would tell you that there's some work to be done. Right? And then once you answer those two questions, like, okay, what do you need to do next? Do you need to let it go, or do you need to figure out what is the incongruence that you need to address?
I feel like there's a lot of competent women out there, but have the low confidence, and that's what's holding them back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they need to. Yeah.
When I do have someone who's struggling with, so that they're high competence, low confidence, there's a few things that can contribute. Well, there's many things that can contribute to that. But if we talk about themes, one of the things that really pops out is not having the right key performance indicators. So in business, we talk about KPIs a lot, right? Yeah. It's like, well, how do you measure yourself? And what a lot of individuals will struggle with is their levels of measurement are so skewed, right? So it doesn't matter if they have 5 wins in a row. If they miss the 6th, then the first 5 don't count. So if your self-evaluation is set up in a way where you don't get to either have the wins or claim the wins, right? Which means you find a way to constantly invalidate yourself, to constantly explain, well, that was a fluke. And I'm sure we all know women who do this, right? Oh no, that was a fluke and that was a mistake, or I had help from so-and-so. And it's like, but who actually did it? Right. So sometimes we just need to think about, how do we actually measure ourselves?
Mm. Well, here's another question for you then. Imposter syndrome's popped up a lot. We've all got our own ideas of what we think it is. Can you tell us what it is? And then why again, does that affect so many women that are, either not just entrepreneurs, but again, trying to go for a CEO position or just a higher level? Or there's a lot of mums in our viewing as well that have been out of the game for a little while. They don't feel like they have the necessary tools and confidence and all those sorts of things to take that next leap. But just explain to us what imposter syndrome is first, and why are we all facing this so regularly?
There's so many different answers out there. So the simplest that I can give you, that I think has been the most effective in my practice, is it's a mismatch of expectations. So imposter syndrome is a mismatch of expectations. Usually we have a set of expectations that A, we can't live up to, and B, aren't necessarily reasonable given the circumstance. So for example, I hear a lot of folks, so I'm part of a mastermind group called the Tinkers, and we talk a lot about how when people come into that group, they feel like they don't belong. Now there's no list, there's no like, here, you check these boxes and you belong, right? So there's no clear standard, which is also something that can inflame imposter syndrome. But in the absence of having that checky box, list of standards, what happens is people start making it up. So they start creating their own set of expectations. Oh, well, I should know this. I should be making this much. I should only ask questions that are deemed, perfect and incredibly intelligent. And we start creating these unreasonable set of expectations that typically other people don't really have for us, right? And once we set the expectations solidly enough, they become the beliefs. And then we start trying to achieve something that isn't grounded in what the actual situation calls for. So, when I usually ask some of my clients about imposter syndrome, I ask, who had a fake ID? Some people are willing to admit it and some people aren't. And some will tell me their funny stories about being in the club underage, whatever the case may be. And I'm like, did you have imposter syndrome then? Because at that point you were actually an imposter, but nobody says, oh my God, I have imposter syndrome. Here I am in the club and I shouldn't be, so the reason it can be so catastrophic to some people is largely because of how much emotion we invest in it. If you're at a new table, what are the most reasonable set of expectations for that situation? So if I walk into a room and people are doing business for 20 more years than I've been doing business, should I have the same revenue, right? Should I have the same knowledge? Should I react the same to problems, right? And the answer you'd say is like, well, no, that's funny. That's silly. But I see people go into the rooms and this is exactly what they explain to me. They say, well, that person over there, Bonnie, is making 10 million, and and I'm not even to 1 million yet. And it's like, they've also been here 20 years longer than you, right? They've also lost more money than you, right? They've taken bigger risks. So we have to really make sure that as strong leaders, we want to be able to get really good at setting our expectations and calibrating those expectations to the environment and the situation that we're in. Sometimes we need, guidance or an external guide to help us with that. But you'll find that if you're good about keeping reasonable expectations, imposter syndrome won't be that big a struggle.
It's knowing your outcome, what you're wanting out of the opportunity or the situation. Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that it's not difficult. It can be quite difficult, especially if you've got really deep set beliefs to overcome. And I don't want to, if anybody's struggling with it, I don't want to be like, oh yeah, that's fine. You just need to set some expectations. You'll be good. Right. But once you get out of that, absolutely. The focused expectations are the way to go.
So what are 3 pieces or a few pieces of advice that you would give an entrepreneur who is struggling with mental pressures of business, or even like starting up a business?
Number 1 would be set your expectations. Right?
Yeah.
Like know what you want out of this, right? So I guess maybe the first one would be like, set your goals. Know why you're there. Somebody should be able to ask you at any given point in time, why have you chosen to do this? And the answer shouldn't take more than 30 seconds. If you have to think about it, you're not sure anymore. Go back to the drawing board, take your time, get alone. And then once you know why you're there, why you've decided to do it, set your expectations. Don't just set your expectations about success. And don't just, some people will go too far. They'll say, okay, it's going to look like this. I'm going to win. Or more likely you'll get the opposite. Oh, it's going to be a struggle and I'm going to have to grind. I'm going to have to sacrifice. It's going to be awful. And it's like, look, set your expectations about both sides of the story so that you have the most reasonable assumptions possible. And then you calibrate those assumptions repeatedly as you go. And the third piece of advice that I would give would be to run your own race. What can crush so many women is, men too, I suppose, but what can crush so many entrepreneurs is looking at somebody else's race or progress and comparing it to their own, right? And that can be so detrimental because we only look at a tiny portion of their story, right? It's like social media. We only look at the highlights. We don't see where that person disappeared for 6 months because they were, heavy into substance use or they had a divorce or they can't hold their relationships together. We just go, oh my God, look at them. Aren't they doing great? So really run your own race would be the third piece of advice I'd give.
That's a really good one too, because, we always compare ourselves with others, like as a person or a mother or as even a business owner, you compare your business with theirs and why isn't mine doing this or they're doing that? Should I do that too? Maybe I should. And then you go off track.
Absolutely.
We always,
without really thinking about what we want, right? It's like, oh, maybe I should do that too. And it's like, well, what's important to you? And that goes back to what I mentioned before about the KPIs, right? Like, what is a good life? Get yourself alone and just ask, like, what is a good life? I'm trying to create a good life for me and my family. I'm like, great, awesome. What's a good life? And I just sit back and I wait. I ask my clients, what is it? Right? Whatever they tell me I want, I'm like, what is that? What does it look like? And why is it important to you? Right? Because sometimes we want things that we were told we should want. Right? Sometimes money, for example, right? Oh, you should make as much money as you can. I've encountered people, it's like, I've not thought about what I want to do with money. So when I ask them, I'm like, well, what do you want to do with it? I don't know. Why do you want it so bad? Because that's what success looks like. Right. And so then you've got to go back and you've got to work to redefine that definition of success so it fits the individual.
Yeah, it's about authenticity, isn't it? And I think really reflecting and understanding where you come from, because we're programmed. Like when I do this values exercise with people, it's understanding the negative and positive influences that you've had in your life that shapes the framework of your personal values, which then obviously influences you in all these other aspects of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. I think, over our conversations, I typically go back and ask about people's history, right? Not because I'm looking to blame someone's parents for something or blame their sister or their brother for something, but it's to say your brain developed in a very specific set of circumstances. And because of those circumstances, it built in certain rules that we today call beliefs. And the better I understand what was going on when those rules were created, the better I know what those rules are designed to protect you from. Right, which means the better the guidance and advice and whatever else I can give. I think part of what led me down the counseling route, down the psychotherapy route, was I have a background in neuroscience. And so I was always very, very interested in what is the brain doing and why is it doing and how does that help us and what does it look like, when we're engaged in any particular psychological process. And I think the more we're able to know our own minds and our own neurobiology and to understand it, not everybody needs a degree in it, but there are some basics that can really help us.
So, Bonnie, when we are growing our businesses or building our own personal brands, we start to get a larger following. We get, further exposure into unknown territory through other people, through collaborations. And what happens is we start to get, some criticism and negative comments and on our posts and things like that. How do you recommend that we manage those sorts of challenges?
They're not talking about you. That's what I usually tell folks. They're not talking about you. We tend to not realize that we don't fear criticism as much as we fear people agreeing with what we think of ourselves. So if we know what we're good at if we know what our competencies are, we know, we're just honest about the story that we tell ourselves, but not self-deprecating, not self-critical. We're not hard on ourselves. You'll find that if you meet those individuals, like they don't really worry about judgment, right? Because there's not something for that to land on. So if I walk up to you and you had, let's say, a bruise in your arm, right? So every day I walk up to you, I kind of pat you on the shoulder. Hey, Lori, how you doing? Right? Probably not going to swing at me. You go and you break that arm or you bruise it up and you've got a real bad wound, and I do the exact same thing. Your instincts will make you flinch. Now, you might not hit me, right? But you're not going to be happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because it lands on a wound. An insult is the same thing. If an insult lands on something that's already vulnerable, it stings like a son of a gun. So you've got to start with, what do you think of you? Because if you're already cutting yourself up, the trolls aren't going to have much work to do. Okay. The other piece is to understand that they don't know you. So at best, I was going to say insects, the insults that they're slinging are about some made up version of what they think you are. Right. So they could replace your name with anybody's name because they don't know anything about you. They're just like, oh, this person on the internet that I think I know. Right. I'm just going to say something about them. It has nothing to do with who you actually are. So they can't insult you because they don't know you. Right. And so these are some of the things that we've got to remember. But it's hard because we go in, and when we're vulnerable, we're much more likely to be defensive. Right. So it's really about grounding yourself, taking care of yourself, and understanding there's a 360-degree range of human behavior. Not all of it is going to be reasonable. Not all of it is going to be appropriate, and not all of it's going to feel good. Right.
The other part to it is that we care so much about what other people think. So when someone does say something negative to us, yes, you might be able to get past it as that person, but I know for me, it would be more like, well, if someone else sees that comment, what are they going to think of me if someone else sees the comment? Not so much of how it affects me, but it's going to, is it going to change and influence what other people are seeing about me and make them look through a different lens at me?
That's a good question. Let's take 30 seconds and play that out, right? So you've got you're like, oh no, I promise I'll be gentle, right? So let's say you go on Facebook, somebody said something, or Instagram, whatever. Somebody's made a comment about you. You said, okay, so the worry is, what if somebody else sees that, right? So if you're my client, I'd say to you, I said, okay, what if somebody else sees it? Tell me why that's a bad thing.
And my response would be, because I feel like it's going to, for other people that kind of like me already, are going to suddenly see me in a negative light.
Okay. So then my next statement would be, so the people that see you in a negative light, what would that mean about them, that it took one comment to sway their position on you?
I'm like, yes, that's true.
Yeah, right. So the thing is do you want to be liked by people that are solid and can really, sift through information critically for themselves? Or do you just want to be liked by everybody? Does it matter who likes you? Right. And so I won't put you on the spot like that, right? But that's exactly how I would do it, is because what happens is we tend to stop every what if at the most emotionally intense part of the story. Right. So the emotionally intense part of the story is, what if that person that I like, that likes me, doesn't like me? That's scary. So we don't think beyond that point. So when we push past and say, okay, well, what if they do? Right. Well, what if it was a really close friend and the friend decided, because they read something that a troll wrote, or someone else wrote online, they're not going to like you anymore. Right. Well, that was the good friend. That was my best friend. Well, how solid was the relationship if that's all it took? Right. So what happens is, as you push the story through, as you tell yourself more and more of the story, you start to realize, hold on, there's more to it. Right. Actually, no, I don't need everybody to like me. I want the people that share my values, share my beliefs, right? That interact and have positive experiences and are free thinking to like me. Because the people that don't, well, there's 9 billion people in the world. Not everybody's going to like you, right? So it can be a bit of a transition, but it goes back again to the story that we have about ourselves. And sometimes I go down that path with people and they'll say, well, they'll think that I'm a fraud, or they'll think that I'm this. And then I'll go, well, do you think that? And sometimes they'll go, well, no, but, and then we'll start digging a little bit deeper and you find out, well, there are some personal insecurities. And what's happening is the insults are inflaming the inner conflict. So those personal insecurities that I'm trying so hard to hide, that I'm scared that somebody out there is going to get a piece of, start coming to the surface and making me emotionally dysregulated and stressed and overwhelmed and reactive. And so it's really more about what's going on inside you than what did some stranger you'll never meet and never know right about you.
It's true, but it's deep. Yeah, as you say, it's deeper. I just remember my conversation with you and working through something, and I was like, and I remember you just asking one or two questions. And as usual, I was like, yep. And I found all my own solutions, and you kept digging and digging. But a lot of that has resonated with me and has changed the way that I view certain things from literally it was one call with you, Bonnie, a couple of years ago. And it's, it's definitely resonated with me. And I definitely changed the way that I approach that particular situation, which is invaluable for me. So thank you. So what's some advice then for people that there's a lot of people that are wanting to forge new paths, start a new business or something like that? What's your advice to them to just take that leap?
You mentioned earlier about women who haven't been out of the workforce for a while, or maybe have been home with their children, or whatever their situation is, and they're having some reservations about kind of getting back in the game, right? And I think sometimes, again, going back to that KPIs, which is a really big theme, we discount the experience and the expertise that we do have because it doesn't show up in a traditional work way. Okay, so for example, I worked with a single mom a short while ago who had taken some time off from her own business to take care of her children. Okay, she was 5 years, I believe, was the gap. And so she's like, when I go back, I'm gonna be behind. And I said, behind who? Like, behind what? Well, I'm not gonna be as good with computers. I'm not gonna be good with this. I don't know the new software, blah, blah, blah. And so what I had her do was list everything she needed to do with her children in the run of the day, right? So she was fortunate. She had some help at home. And so I said, well, who coordinates the schedules? I do. Who made the schedules? I do. Who organizes the lunches and the meals? I do. Who takes care of the finances and pays the bills? I do, right? So we're talking about things like time management, right? The dealing with deadlines, right? The ability to think under pressure, the ability to not take a sick day. Like kids aren't like, mom's out today, I'll just fend for myself, we're good, right? So sometimes because we think that skills need to show up a certain way, we'll tell ourselves that we don't have them. And what I notice with a lot of women is we're very quick to discount our capabilities and our competencies. And if you make it a priority to say, I'm going to discover my competencies, I'm going to discover all the things that I'm good at, whether they show up in a traditional way or not, then what happens is we reset ourselves, we teach ourselves to look at ourselves differently, because we're very used to looking at ourselves with a critical lens, right? Oh, our face doesn't look good, we have to lose more weight, we have to this, all this stuff. We're always looking to see what we can improve in ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it causes a problem if we don't have any balance, if we never spend any time trying to find all the things we don't need to improve, right? And all the things we're already good at. So like, if there's one skill that I'd say, listen, close down today after you wrap up and just go home, it's like, go and every single day you ask yourself, what am I good at, right? What are the skills that I haven't identified in myself? What are the things that I do because I do them very well, even if I don't like to do them, right? Because we really need to start building our own inventory of wins, right? That's what self-esteem and self-confidence can be built on, is, yeah, I have competencies, but when we discount them, it makes it very, very difficult to build real and lasting confidence.
Appreciate your time today. Thank you so much, Bonnie.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. Everybody have a great rest of the day, evening.
Thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
Bye-bye.
Bye.